So this week we jump into chapter 26 and we are met with the story now of Isaac. And Isaac is in a land and there's a famine. It says kind of like when Abraham had a famine. And so he starts to kind of leave because there's a famine and he's going to a better place. And I love in verse 3, it says that God spoke to him and it says, "Do not go to Egypt. Live in the land which I tell you. Dwell temporarily in this land and I will be with you and will favor you with blessings for you and your descendants." And he goes on to repeat the promise that he made to Abraham and who is now promised to Isaac because he is the lineage of Abraham. He is the child of promise like we've talked about. And so I love that God repeats the same promise to him. And there's a commentator that I really love, Matthew Henry, that says this about that. He says, "Those that must live by faith have need often to review and repeat to themselves the promises they are to live upon, especially when they are called to any instance of suffering or self-denial." And I think it's interesting that you see that God always repeated this promise both to Abraham and now Isaac when there is a time of desperation, when there is a time of trial, when there's a time of need. God reminds them, I'm here. I made this promise. I'm going to stay faithful. And I wonder how many times in our own lives we need to look at the promises of God and we need to say, God, I'm going to repeat these promises that you said about me. You said I'm healed. You said I have joy. You say I am provided for. How many times do we need to repeat those to ourselves? If God had to repeat them to people that are very faithful in the Bible, Abraham was named as faithful throughout the New Testament, and yet God had to repeat himself to him. And so I think that we have a little bit more capability to get into the word, find out what the promises are, and we can say them about ourselves. We can declare them over our lives. And so if they needed it to be repeated to them, we need to repeat it to ourselves. But we go on. He listened. He obeyed. I love that verse 6, all it says is, so Isaac stayed in Gerar, which is what God told him to do. And so we see that he begins to be blessed there. But before that, we see that he falls into the same sin that his father did with Abimelech. Now, at first, when I first read this, you might say, oh, is this the same Abimelech that Abraham did this to? Because Isaac says, no, she's my sister, she's not my wife. And we know Abram did the same thing with an Abimelech. But if you kind of study it out, scholars believe that Abimelech is a word almost like Pharaoh. So it's not really a name, it's more a position. And so he's a king. And so that is why his name is that. So we don't believe that these are the same. Could be, but there's like 75 to 100 years in between the two. So it's highly improbable, or it's not probable that it would be the same one. But we see that he falls into the same sin. And I think there's a verse that says, there is no sin but what is common to man. And even then God will provide a way out. And so I think we are all tempted with the same things. There are times where we can be in fear, or we can be in lust, or we can be in those things. I think that we sometimes feel like, oh, I don't suffer from that sin or what have you. But they are all common to man. And so we see that he falls into this, and Abimelech is like, what have you done? Get away from me. Get out of here, right? And so he sends him away, but Isaac was told to stay in that area. And so he goes to the valley area that's near there, but not still in the same place. And he goes to a place where Abram had been before. And he had many wells that were doing very well in this area when Abraham was here. But the Philistines didn't like it, and so they filled them in. And so now we see Isaac going back to these places, but the wells aren't there anymore. And so we know he's pretty prosperous at this point. And so he starts to dig these wells. And I think this is a great lesson to us, is that we can spur on the faith of the generations before us. Abraham had faith and did these things, and God did them. The enemy tried to come in and take it away, but Isaac said, no, I will hold on to that promise. I will hold on to that faith in this area. God told me to be here. I will be here. And I sometimes think that we can build on those that came before us, whether it's our parents, our grandparents, or our pastors, or our church. We can build on the faith they began. The enemy might have came in and tried to destroy it, but we can go back and unearth those wells. And so he begins to do this. And what I love is then Abimelech, notices that, hey, Isaac's getting prosperous, even in the middle of a famine. How is this possible? He must have favor with God. And what does he do in true nature of man? Oh no, I need to be on his side. We need to be friends. And so in true nature, when you begin to have a place of status, a place of position, people will come out of the woods and want to be your friend because they want a piece of what you have, or they want to make sure they're at peace with you because they know you can destroy them. And so the part I love about this is that Isaac goes ahead and makes a covenant with him. He forgives the fact that Abimelech threw him out and told him not to be there. He forgives that they treated him poorly, that they kept complaining, because as he would dig the wells up, they would come and try to take him back. And so they've not had room for him. He finally finds a place where they're not really bothering him, and now they're here and they want to make this covenant. And what I love is that with God, we can forgive and we can be at peace with those around us. And Isaac is a pure example of that. These guys did not do him right. They didn't treat him right, but he knew that his provision came from God, and he wanted to extend love and mercy to those around him. And so I think we can learn from this that even when people do us wrong, even when they're not perfect, even when they may be speaking ill against us, that we can choose to live and be at peace with them and extend forgiveness. So join us next week as we jump into 27. Here at the end, we see that Esau marries a woman to two women and that were not of the tribe that he should have been marrying, and he causes grief to his family, and we'll kind of get into that. That will lead into the next chapter. But join us next time for chapter 27.